anticipated. So that's the second part of James chapter 1 tonight. Now let's look at the third one, which I think all of us can relate to. In verses 13 through 15, look at what he says. Let no one say when he's tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. We could stop it right there. God doesn't tempt us. But each one is tempted when he's carried away and enticed by his own lusts. Then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. And then verse 16, do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Now, in this passage, James is talking to you and me about temptation. Excuse me. He's talking about the alluring to sin, to disobey God in whatever form it might be. And so he warns us. He says, first of all, don't say when I'm tempted, God is tempting me to sin, because God doesn't do that. You see, all of us have a choice to make in every circumstance of life, don't we? We have at least two choices. We can go the way we want to go or the way we think God wants us to go. We can go with our own base desires and appetites and anger, desire for revenge, desire for pleasure, whatever it might be. We can go in that direction, even though it may violate God's principles. Or we can say, no, I'm going to say no to that, and I'm going to get away as fast as I can. I'm going to run from that. I'm going to change my mind about that. I have two directions. So God says, I don't tempt you. God never tempts anybody. But God says, you're tempted by your own appetites and lusts. And, that brings up an interesting question, because you and I live in a very interesting time that we've never experienced before. The word sin, because we're talking about temptation to sin, to violate God. But that word sin and what it means has been redefined. There are experiences, and there are illustrations we could use. I won't go into all of them or any of them really right now, but where once upon a time, not too long ago, we could say, well, that is sin. But society and culture, there's such a cancel culture movement that what we used to call sin is not sin anymore. It's preference or whatever it might be. Carl Menninger wrote an interesting book back in 1975. He's a psychiatrist, was a psychiatrist, and he wrote a book entitled, basically, Whatever Became of Sin. And in that, he asked this question. He made an observation. He said that he sees the day coming, and we experience it, where sin is removed from the vocabulary. And what used to be called sin now might be called an addiction or a preference or an idea. There's no longer this or that is sin. We've moved away from that, and we don't really define it that way anymore. And so, it's hard sometimes, especially for younger people who are coming along, to look at something and say, that's a sin. I need to stay away from it. I need to avoid it. So maybe that's another topic for another day. But in this one, he's talking about being drawn to sin. Where does it come from? In the Apocrypha, which we don't use, but our Catholic brothers do, in the book of Enoch, it says that sin comes, basically from two places. One, from fallen angels, that they tempt us, and then from us, from within us, that we choose that. I don't know what your experience has been like, but mine and the experience of a lot of people I know is that when we sin and we're tempted, and everybody's tempted with different things, it is because our minds have been conditioned for it, our hearts have been conditioned for it, and then one day we just reach out and take it. And it's because of the things we put into our minds and into our hearts that draws us away. I had a professor in seminary, Dr. Munn, who used to say, I don't have to stick my head in a trash can to know that it stinks. And what he was trying to say to us is this: there are some things in life that are so bad for you that you don't need to dabble with them. You need to avoid them altogether. You don't have to stick your head in a trash can to know that smells. And there are some things that come along in our lives. All of us, we're all tempted for different things, that God would say, you know, you're drawn because you have a desire for that, you have an interest in that, you have a taste for that, and we would be wise to find a way to replace that appetite, that we don't feed that in our minds, because he says the end result of that is ultimately death. It's physical death, obviously, but also spiritual death. Dabbling with temptation and embracing it brings spiritual death ultimately. And it's not a final, all of a sudden you drop. It is a short-term kind of over and over drifting away. And so James is real clear. Well, that was it for tonight. I don't know how long this is. Keep those emails coming. Let me know how these classes or this particular class is impacting you, how I can help a little bit more. And next week, we're going to be in James chapter 2, and we're going to be talking about the difference between faith and works. I'm excited about that one. Invite a friend, but I need their email so I can send this to them.